Before you is an amazing vintage separate component set which was released back in 1982 during the period when Marantz was owned by Philips. 2 years earlier, the Dutch had acquired the dealer network and all overseas assets except for those in the USA and Canada, which is the focus of our story today. This period is often called the lost decade due to the decline in product quality compared to the previous decade, the 70s. After all, as is well known, Saul Marantz founded the company bearing his name in his own home in Kew Gardens, New York. And just to put it in perspective, that was back in 1948. And since then, high-end audio components have become the company's calling card, renowned for their design, innovation, and unique sonic signature that would later be refined even further by the incomparable Ken Ishiwata. So let's take a thorough look at it from all sides, assess the build quality, take a peek inside, and in the end, even listen to it and find out just how good it really is. By the way, we'll be doing the listening in my Telegram channel, where I post a lot of interesting content, so feel free to join. Everyone's welcome. That's where I upload full recordings that YouTube doesn't block. So please, by the way, we also give away various vinyl records there. And in general, you know what I do. Home theaters, stereo systems. I put together setups, really awesome setups that actually deliver, because creating a stereo system that gives you the maximum experience is no easy task, believe me. Do you remember that distant year, 1982? That was the year of the first flight of Ka-50 helicopter, death of Brezhnev, and Michael Jackson released the best-selling album in history, 100 million copies. What was it called? Write your answers in the comments. Marantz, meanwhile, introduced its first CD player, the CD63, which marked the beginning of the digital era. Although our heroes here, the SC-500 and SC-500DC, remained in the analog realm, just like their older siblings, the SC7 and SM7, which you can see on the screen now. Essentially, this was top-class equipment that met high-end audio standards, which, by the way, didn't even exist yet, since they would only be established essentially by Americans in the 90s. The classic modular approach, which over the decades would completely displace integrated solutions from the Olympus of uncompromising high-end audio. As we can see, our heroes feature the classic modular approach, specifically a preamplifier and a separate power amplifier. Over the decades, it is precisely these separate components that will completely push integrated amplifiers of the Olympus of the very top tier. Because it is precisely these kinds of things that allow you to get the most out of your system, while also making audio more versatile. Because in theory, if you had a different class of power, you could add a second one, bridge them, and get even more performance. And of course, for such improvements, with users end up paying much more, but in return, we get only small gains. But that's just how the world works, because once you reach a certain level, you end up paying a lot for just those extra millimeters or centimeters of improvement. For me, the main indicator is, of course, the price to quality ratio, because, as I've said many times before, you can spend a ton of money and still get pretty mediocre sound. At the same time, you can spend not that much and get truly amazing sound. All of this, of course, depends on your experience, your understanding, what exactly you're buying, how you set it up, and even what you use to listen to. In short, there are just 1,000 nuances involved. If you don't want to deal with all that, just reach out to me. I'll take care of everything in the best possible way. Our heroes feature the distinctive Marantz design, including the champagne color that was the brand's signature during that period. The SM-500DC stands out especially for its large VU meters, which magically jump all the way up to 100 watts. Here it's shown at 8 ohms, although the unit itself delivers 80 watts. By the way, that's quite a decent amount of power for those times, because as you remember, every year the power keeps increasing, both in amplifiers and in cars. And of course, I'm of the opinion that, let's say, you can never have too much horsepower, because let me give you an example. A car, for instance, with 100 horsepower, right? It can accelerate up to 100 kilometers per hour and will feel more or less normal at that speed. But at 150, you understand yourself that there will be extra vibrations and it will behave completely differently, because the engine will be running almost at its maximum RPM. Now, let's take a car with 400 horsepower. How will it behave at 150? Completely differently. It doesn't even need to do 200. Which it's capable of. or 250. Even 150 kilometers per hour in a more powerful car will feel completely different. The same applies to more powerful amplifiers, because engineers have long understood the more power under the hood, the better you'll be able to listen to music at low volume, and accordingly, the better the control over the speakers will be. But again, there's also a parameter called the damping factor. All of this comes together, and as a result, we get a much more interesting and higher quality sound. So, try connecting all other things being equal, an 80-watt amplifier and a 260-watt amplifier, and you'll experience a completely different understanding of sound and how you actually feel the sound waves, those very vibrations. Sound is the same kind of energy that appears when speakers generate these waves, because sound can only travel through some kind of medium. There is no sound in space. Accordingly, we can hear sound waves underwater, and they can even travel through wood. In air, of course, there are different laws at play. There are also concepts such as sound intensity. So, if you're interested in this topic, I'll make a video about it. But for now, let's take a look at its design. By the way, I'm selling this component for 45,000 rubles. Friends, if you're interested, just let me know. We'll make sure everything is done perfectly. What do we have here? Look, the bass adjustment is stepped, and when I switch it, it makes a very satisfying click. But you probably won't hear it, even though I'm using a top quality lavalier mic. Tall. Next, we have the tone control. You can turn the bypass on, in and OUT, respectively. The subsonic filter is, of course, turned off. And take note, you can adjust the loudness to either +8 decibels or about +4 decibels. Also, in my Bristons, if I remember correctly, you can set it to 28 decibels and 23, or 29 and 23. In general, tape monitor. Well, at that time, it was very fashionable to record and re-record cassettes. And in this device, take note, there is a feature for direct double dubbing. Copying, you see 1 to 2 and 2 to 1. Or you can switch the mode, direct, tuner, phonotape, aux, and phonocorrector. Here, of course, you have both MM and MC. So it's not just MM and MC, you can also adjust it to either 47 or 100 kilo ohms. That's how it is, friends. But there's another feature of this device that's unusual nowadays. Pay attention to how the balance is adjusted. So here we have the volume knob. And over here, oh, you see something's jumping around. Let's not burn anything out. Let's turn it off like this. So that's the sound and balance. And here everything is simple. Speaker A, speaker B, and accordingly the power button. You can turn it on, and again you can plug in headphones. And here is this magnificent analog meter showing the left and right channels respectively, just like that. Marvelous. Let's take a look at the back. And for that, of course, we'll disconnect it from the power. What do we have here? Everything's turned off, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we turn it around. The preamp is light, about 3 kilograms. I think it might even be a bit less. And take a look at the kind of power supply we have here. Just this standard one. Pre-out, again, tape monitor, out, in, and accordingly the inputs, phono preamp, aux, and tuner, folks. Everything is simple and clear. And of course, that very enticing Made in Japan label, which used to drive people crazy in the 90s and 2000s. Now, of course, the Japanese are absolutely not the same anymore. Somewhere I read that, unfortunately, the nation is dying out. They have a very low influx of younger generations. The elderly continue to live past 90, especially on the Okinawa Islands. There, the number of centenarians is simply off the charts. And why is that? Because they have quality food, the sea, they eat a varied diet, practice karate, swim, and so they enjoy life, listen to music, and live long lives. Unfortunately, here in Russia, in Smolensk actually, I recently found out, can you imagine, that the amount of precipitation in Moscow is higher than in London. Can you believe that? It's just awful. Everyone thinks that London is all about rain and clouds. But Moscow actually gets more rain. How is that even possible? It's a mystery. Let's move our amplifier aside and show you the backside. These are just regular wires. Victor wouldn't have appreciated them. But what can you say? Well, the terminals are like that, so the wires are like that too. Grounding, and accordingly the input to the preamplifier. And here are these terrible clamps. Definitely not high-end. These days you only see these in the cheapest receiver. And sometimes in amplifiers, really, it's just pure China. And this is Japan, my friends. Let's open it up and see what's inside. They promised a spherical transformer, how everything is arranged, and then I'll tell you how it sounds, because I've listened to it for about 4 days, and I can tell you everything, as always, without sugarcoating. We are unscrewing the last so-called screw bolt. You know, now I've started double-checking my own information. I always thought that the concept of high-end really took hold in the 90s. But no, my friends. Justin Gordon-Hall, the founder of Audiophile, according to one source, writes that he essentially coined this term back in 1962. How is that possible? And another source says that in the 70s, this term had already firmly entered the lives of us stereophiles. Please write in the comments what you think about this. Which years do you think? The 60s, 70s, 80s or 90s? When did the real, truly high-end appear? Thank you. Personally, I still think it was the 90s when all the top manufacturers started making these amazing separate components. But alright, that's another story. Let's take off the cover of our preamplifier and see what the Japanese have prepared for us. Oh friends, look at this layout. This is real old school. Wow, just look at that. And look, there's actually quite a lot of free space inside. And they say that only now our very same prime ministers are leaving a free place there. This is bad. Here you go, Marantz 1982. Yes, this wasn't exactly their top-of-the-line series, but it was a solid mid-range model that cost a fair amount. You see how everything is arranged here? And here we have this kind of transformer, a shaped one. A little guy wrapped up in some kind of electrical tape. I don't know. It's kind of, well, overall it's debatable, guys. Overall, it's debatable. Let's take a look at what's inside the power amp. By the way, you can copy the circuit diagram. I looked at the manual and it actually includes the entire internal layout, how everything is connected and where it all goes. And based on this information, you can accordingly build something similar yourself. But I don't think you'll do a better job than Marantz. Let's keep looking. Whoa! Just look at this amp we've got here. 2 capacitors, most likely original. The power supply is hidden under a plate. By the way, it's very, very hot. Check out the heat sinks. Look how original and interestingly they're made. They're so thin, not ribbed. The wiring was laid out back then, probably in the 80s, maybe by Japanese virgins living on Mount Fuji. They put all this together to achieve that warm, interesting sound. By the way, the capacitors each have a capacity of 10,000 microfarads. So in total, we get 20. That's really not much, in my opinion. Although, you see, the overall sound is pretty good, but I'll talk about that a bit later. The chassis is quite heavy, but the transformer is really, really massive. I think it makes up about 80% of the total weight because, well, it's just really good. I won't remove the plate, but most likely, friends, let's shine some light here. I'll turn on the flashlight. Take a look, just for you. Let's get in there. See what kind of edging it has in there. That's some kind of additional casing. Basically, everything is done to minimize interference from this very transformer. By the way, it's completely red hot. And so that the interference doesn't get transmitted to the board accordingly. But here, well, in this case, the circuit is actually pretty much ideal because the preamp section is separated. You can even place it somewhere to the side, preferably on this side so the transformer doesn't touch it. Or even, you know, under some kind of shelf. And of course, this will definitely reduce interference, friends. What can I say about its sound? Well, you know, it's that typical classic Marantz sound. I listened to RB on it, it just doesn't play it at all. I listened to rock, absolutely not the right fit. But when you turn on jazz, when you play, say, Sarah Brightman, she starts to sing. But really, it's best with old jazz, something like my go-to True Blue. Yes, it's got that rich, mellow, honeyed, quality good classic Marantz sound. Ken Ishiwata would later tweak it a bit, making it a little colder and, let's say, a bit more precise. These devices are pure vintage, real vintage, no doubt about it. I even started adjusting the tone controls here because I just wasn't getting enough punch. Even though I'm always against using the tone block and always try to avoid it, but for the sake of the experiment, I did use it. By the way, George Michael's Roxanne sounded really authentic on this setup. So does this kind of vintage have a place? If you want to put together a truly jazz-oriented system, hook it up to Tannoy speakers and you'll be in heaven. But if you want something faster, not vintage, not these kinds of devices, then this isn't for you. Because back then all of this was designed with a certain type of music in mind. Nowadays, completely different genres are in charge. Accordingly, both speakers and amplifiers are made with that focus and consideration. Back then, rock and roll, again jazz, vocal instrumental compositions, this combination in particular, performed admirably. The fact that Philips bought Marantz back then and decided to make it more mainstream was probably a mistake. Because again, after a few decades, we'll see that hi-fi will really start to, well, not exactly die out, but stagnate significantly. Because once again, music will be played from absolutely any device, practically even from an iron. Tunes will play everywhere, phones will start playing them, laptops too, and speakers will become smaller. But back then in the 80s, music was almost a cult. You'd come home, put on a cassette player or a turntable, turn on the music, sit down in an armchair or on the sofa, and just enjoy it. Now though, everything is completely different. And headphones, like I said, music is everywhere these days. That's not right. I'm always in favor, let's say, of proper cultured listening. Go to the Philharmonic, listen to live musicians, close your eyes and figure out where the stage is. Because many people don't even understand what a stage is, my friends. You see, how can I put it? Since childhood I always went to music school, so I knew what a musical stage was. But some people just don't get it. You set things up and say, look, the singer is right in the center. Here's the guitarist, here's the drummer. And here, this space is filled in with additional musical transitions that the sound engineer planned for when mixing everything together. You explain it to someone and they say, damn, but I just don't hear it. And I ask, well, when was the last time you went to a concert? They say, honestly, I've never really gone. What about the Philharmonic? No, I haven't been. You see? Well, that's why after that, of course, people won't hear the influence of cables or dampers or any of those cones like those Nordos ones, which actually have a big impact. There needs to be understanding, there needs to be culture. And I really hope that my viewers do actually attend such events, and then there won't be all these lingering questions about whether something has an effect or not. Everything truly has an effect, friends. The only question is whether you're willing to pay for it. This setup, you can push it further. Go ahead. You can make it even sharper. Connect it with a Nordos cable, some entry-level sharp one, because for me, Nordos really only starts with Valhalla, and Odin, that's it. Everything below that is, well, just not the same. By the way, you can double them up, then you get the same Valhalla. For example, you take a Heimdall, add exactly the same cable, run it in biamping, and you get about the same result, maybe even a greater improvement than with Valhalla. But that's a completely different story. So, you put it on a titanium cone, connect the entry-level Nordos with a sharp sound, and believe me, that honey-like warmth of the Martin immediately starts to disappear. It becomes sharper, more precise, especially if you also connect something like a Blue Heaven for the power supply. In general, friends, it's a good combination. Want honey for your ears? Go for these. Want something more serious? No problem. You can get the same Premiera 2 with the meters. How much does it cost? I think it's 50,000 rubles, but you get a 3-year warranty, completely different technologies, and a totally different sound. Although, by the way, it's less powerful. As far as I remember, the Premiere is 50 watts, and this one is 80. So in that case, you'd need to pay extra for the A3. Subscribe. See you.